What I'm going to show you right now is how to work with a very wide trim, and in this case I'm also going to be showing how to work with really thick fabric that you're deciding not to do a double pocket, this is corduroy, or a double hood. So there's more than one way to do this, but this is the back of the pocket. This one was already done by a student, and so I'm not going to show you how to attach the trim using this. I'll show you how to attach a wide trim using the hood. But I'm going to show you this part, which is that you can use a quilt bias tape as a way to finish the pocket when you don't have a double pocket. So that's that part, and you would start by putting that on first, and you would only put it on the edges. So this is a very wide trim, and I hope you can see that because it's wide, you have to actually put a tuck. There's a tuck here, there's a tuck here, and what I'm going to show you is an easy way to get the bias tape on both sides of the trim while making sure that you can get around this corner. Now here's the hood. I've already completed the basic construction of the hood, and I'm going to use either the quilt binding along the edge, or I can use this double fold bias tape binding along the edge. Now, this is a unique example of what we've been talking about, where this little middle section is supposed to be a little bit longer so that you can trim it off to match the front of the hood. In this case, it's just the opposite. The front of the hood is a little longer than this top section. So you get to see what happens when you do that. You can't put this binding on over a stair step. You have to have an even spot here. So I take and I stick my scissors next to the edge of the short section, and then I'm just going to trim down and that way I no longer have a stair step. I've shortened the front part just this tiny bit. It's not going to make a big difference. I'm going to begin by using the quilt binding, double-sided quilt binding. And just as I did with my other hood, I'm going to begin up here at the top, and I don't have to start on that seam. I can start right here in the middle. Okay, I'm going to attach this going along the left-hand side here of that quilt bias tape. I'm going to go through and make sure that I'm sandwiching things, and I'm going to very carefully and slowly go all the way around the hood. I've just finished putting this binding all around the edge of the hood, and I've also gone through and made sure that it was also sewn on the inside. Remember that just because it's sewn on the outside doesn't mean that it's sewn on the inside. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out how much of the trim I'm going to need to get all the way around, with a little bit extra to have a fold under over here. So I'm going to hold it where I started my binding, which is there, and I'm just going to lay it as I go all the way around until I get back to that spot. And then remembering that I'm also going to tuck a little bit under, I'm going to cut it here. Now, if this were binding that was not so wide, I would recommend laying it next to the other binding and sewing it onto the hood or the pocket, as whichever the case may be, while holding it in place. So I would recommend holding it here while gauging your distance over on the right side. But because this is so wide, it can be really difficult to keep the single fold bias tape here on the left tucked perfectly under while sewing it and keeping it the same distance, or the same amount of bias tape on the right side. So a trick that I have to make this job easier is that I sew my single fold bias tape onto my trim before attaching it to the hood. And I will just lay it, and that way I'm only having to focus on keeping that together here at the beginning. And then it's almost like having it be a part of the trim. Now in this case, you always want your thread to match your trim so that you're not making a mark on your trim. In this case, this trim has a line of black right near the edge, and I'm going to stay on that line of black, continuing to sew with my black thread. Okay, you can see that I've attached that black bias tape. I have extra bias tape here. I'm going to trim it up right to the edge, and now I can attach it to the hood, starting here at the top. And I'm going to be focusing on sewing on the edge of this black bias tape to attach it to the hood. After I'm done doing that, I will attach this section to this bias tape. So I need to keep the right side of the trim framed by the black bias tape that was already attached to the hood, and be sewing all the way over here on the left. So I'm going to have to keep laying it. You can even pin it if you need to. But I'm going to keep laying it and making sure that it's even. What tends to happen is you lose your focus and this starts going to the right or to the left, and you end up with an uneven framing of your trim, and if it gets really bad, then you have to take it out and start over. As you get here to the bottom or the front of the neck, it's going to be tempting to bunch up this part here as you're matching the part to the right, but it's very important that you go ahead and stretch out the fabric and don't worry about what's happening to the right so much. Just lay it down a little bit, and then you can bring it up. Because again, you're going around a pretty steep curve right now. The most difficult part of the project, right there in that curve. I'm almost to the end here. I'm folding it under, and when I get to the end, I'm going to sew it down. So I'm going to turn it. Especially in a really wide trim like this, you want to tack down this middle portion. So I'm turning myself around and I'm going to sew along that edge that has been folded over to tack it down. Now that I've gotten to the edge, I'm going to lift up my foot, I'm going to turn it, and remember, this edge has not been tacked down. So now I'm going to go along and tack this whole edge down. And there's going to be parts, as I get to the front, that I'm going to have to do a pleat, and I'm going to show you that. I think it's better to pleat more frequently, and so here the fabric is starting to bunch up on me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch that little bit of bunched up fabric, and then I'm going to sew over that pinch. As I get closer to the front, then I'm going to have to pinch more frequently. Things are going to start getting bunched up more frequently. Right here at the very front, I can do a nice big pinch. And then to kind of even it out, I'm going to do another one, coming the other, pinching the other direction. Do another little pinch here. I've attached the trim all the way around, and you can see these pleats right here, these little tucks. Here's another one. Here's a very small one. But if you've done it right, then you get all the way around and you don't have any tucks in the actual hood fabric. You just have them in the trim that goes all the way around. The next little thing I want to go over is how you prepare your pocket when it's not a double-sided pocket before putting it onto the front, the body part. So I'm going to flip it over, and I don't need this extra bit of trim because I'm not going to be tucking. This isn't a finished edge. So I'm going to trim this up right next to the edge of that pocket. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to make sure that the top of my pocket is evened up as well, and it is. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a one fold over, sewing this down. And I'm going to sew from the front, just fold down and sew along the top. And I'm going to fold down and sew along the edge. And when I'm done folding and sewing down the edges, then I'm going to go and fold down and sew across the whole bottom. Okay, so this is the back of the pocket. You can see where I've sewn down this edge and this edge, and then I've sewn across the bottom, and I've done the same thing here across the top. And now it's ready to attach to the body.